Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday and welcome to Leadership Live. I am Christine Tao. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Sounding Board. We're a dynamic leader development platform that offers both coaching and mentoring to companies that are looking to develop their leaders. And Leadership Live is about bringing really inspiring leaders in the space to come on and share a bit about their journey and to offer some insights into the work that they've done and how you might be able to take that and apply that in your own work. And so I am thrilled to be welcoming Beth Steinberg to the webinar today. I have known Beth for quite some time across the many companies where she's led the people function, including Zenefits, Sunrun. I think, there's kind of too many to name. She was most recently the CPO at Chime, and recently transitioned into being an advisor. But I am thrilled to be able to have her join us today. So hi, Beth, and welcome.
Hi, Christine. Great to be here and lovely to see you.
Well, Beth, I've been looking forward to this because I think, when we met now, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago,
At least, at
at
least.
least. Yeah.
More, actually,
Um,
more than that. More like, I don't know, probably 2017 or 2018. So it's been more than that.
That's right. And you were someone that I had got to know early in our journey at Sounding Board. And I think we really connected over this shared passion for leader development and sort of investing in developing people. And so, and I know that that's been a thread that you've taken with you through all the companies that you've worked at. And so would love to just hear first a bit more about your origin story and to share a bit more with folks about that and maybe how that's influenced how you've approached your work.
Yeah. Sure. I'm happy to share. So I got into the field of people and talent, I would say sort of by accident. So, my whole life, I thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist and was going to school for clinical psychology. I had my great aunt and uncle were psychologists, and I had always admired them and was very proud of the impact that they made. One of them, my great aunt, is still alive, and at 97 she's still seeing clients, which is hard to
Amazing.
believe true. And so that was always my path. And when I started doing my studies, I realized that I just did not have enough life experience to be effective. I was very young. I was 23. I hadn't really done that much in my life, and trying to, go into a master's PhD program, it was just too much. So at the time I was working at Nordstrom, just sort of part-time during school, and they were opening a very big new region in the Midwest. And somehow, someone saw talent in me, and asked me if I would be open to moving to the Midwest and helping open that region. And to be honest with you, I don't think I, was that mature to put a lot of thought process into it, but I said yes. So I moved from San Diego, where I was in grad school, to Chicago. And that was really my first role. And, subsequently, at Nordstrom, I ended up, being the manager, the HR manager of multiple stores that had anywhere from 800 to 1,200 employees, and we're doing, anywhere from 75 million to 150 million in revenue. And I just, I had these very large jobs and didn't really, have much experience. And sort of two things happened. Number one, I realized that you constantly have to be learning and growing and reading and learning from people. And secondly, I realized that, it is really possible to pivot and to change and to, think about what you thought you were going to do might be able to take you in many, many different ways. So, during my time at Nordstrom, I hired about 10,000 people. I opened multiple stores. And that was sort of how I got into this field. And then I moved to tech. And realized that people are people. I went from retail to heavy tech, and it was a pretty easy transition for me as long as I was willing to learn and grow. So that's how it all started.
Amazing. I do feel like at least even my own personal experience is that people often see folks like yourself that, are now at the top of your profession and think that your journey and career was always a very intentional and thoughtful one. And what
Um,
I almost always find is that when you ask, there's actually a lot of elements of being curious and just sort of following opportunities in ways that you may not think of when you're at that age.
Yeah, I think that's totally, totally true. And I think, there's very few people that I know that, decided they were going to be in this field and studied it. And, I think sometimes, two of the qualities that I would apply to looking at any leader, I try to apply to myself when I'm making decisions. And that's curiosity and self-awareness, which I think are two extremely important qualities in any leader.
Do you feel like your interest and exposure to psychology was an influence in that thinking?
I do. I think very much, people are trying to do the best that they can. I sort of had this saying, and I still believe it to be true. Nobody comes in to sabotage the company. So when someone is not doing a good job, there's usually a reason for that.
Mm.
Um, and I think you have to find that out. Now, sometimes somebody's just not the right fit, and that's fine. That happens all the time. And I think you need to deal with that, gracefully and maturely and respectfully. But I think oftentimes, people just need to learn. They need to have the support, and that often doesn't happen. And I think that led me to, I think how we connected, my deep belief in the support and development of employees at all levels in
Yeah.
order to actually drive business outcomes.
Yeah. And it's I think a great segue for something that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about, which is investment in learning and development, particularly around leaders and managers, right?
Yes.
Because I think you've seen the impact of that in the companies where you've made that investment. Can you share just a bit more about what's, driving that belief and, some of the things that you've done?
Sure. So, I think I think in the beginning of my career, I felt sort of, I don't know if the right word is resentment or anger around these managers who I just thought were not good managers and not doing their job. And I could see the fallout from that, sometimes large, sometimes small, but it still had an erroneous impact on the company and the outcomes of the company. And then I, had to sort of, look inside myself a little bit. And I realized that most companies don't treat leadership like a skill and a craft.
Yes.
And I started thinking to myself, how would these people know how to lead? And I say this to people, like, I could be an engineer, but I would have to learn it. I would have to practice it. I'd have to get feedback on being an engineer. And somehow we just think you're anointed a leader and you're going to be a good leader. Well, we know that's not the case. And so throughout my career, I've really started to understand that good leaders, good management practices, good leadership practices are an enabler to a company scaling and an enabler, to driving financial outcomes for a company. And, when I think about the focus on middle managers, to me, it's pretty logical. Middle managers often are one of the least experienced people in the company in terms of leading. They are oftentimes, especially in my world in scaling technology companies, they may be reporting to somebody who's in the biggest job that they've ever had, who is probably reporting to somebody who's in the biggest job that they've ever had. And unless you equip them with the tools, the training, the feedback to be an effective leader, so much falls out. And you can see it in terms of like hiring the wrong people.
Yeah.
Not giving enough feedback, not knowing how to kind of course correct and drive business outcomes. And so I just think it is such a miss. And I can't imagine the anxiety that a middle manager goes through not knowing how to do something, but
Yeah.
maybe feeling like they can't ask a question or admit that they don't know. And so it's a super solvable problem that I think, if solved, like the financial output of companies would be so much more robust, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I know certainly, we've worked with you in past companies and at Chime to really invest in a lot of those mid-level managers. What's some of the impact that you've seen from that?
Yeah, and we've done a lot. I mean, I think, coaching, obviously sounding board does coaching, and it used to be that only the most senior people could get coaching. And I think, companies like Sounding Board have really democratized the ability to get a coach. And so what we at Chime and at other companies that I've been at, we put in sort of a multi-pronged approach to training and development. And I think it has to be, people learn in different ways, and you have to have, in my opinion, different modalities in order to really drive effective learning. And, I use a model of 70, 20, 10, 70 learning by doing, 20% coaching and mentoring, and then 10% more classroom or structured, what we think of more traditional learning. And, what I have found is the ability to raise a leader's competence and confidence just changes everything. And I think, we have put in at Chime, for example, coaching programs through Sounding Board, where almost every director, senior director, has had the ability to get a coach. And, you see it drive such a difference in the way that people think about themselves as leaders. And, leadership can be a very lonely job. It's not, it's not super normal to admit that you need help or admit you don't know anything. And so having that relationship with a coach where you can be vulnerable, where you can get really clear, prompts of what you should be thinking about and doing, I think just makes all the difference in the world in terms of both cultural outcomes and business outcomes.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned two things that you had always looked for, which was really curiosity and then self-awareness. And I'm struck by how much coaching really is a very impactful modality in impacting both of those two behaviors and characteristics.
It is. And I think, I am grateful that I am a coach. I'm a PCC, ICF certified coach. And I wanted to go through it myself so I could really understand the power of it. And, it's just, in my opinion, completely powerful. And I do think, coaching is not about telling somebody what to do. It is really prompting you to solve your own problems and to think through solutions. And, the power of coaching is really about asking powerful questions. And I've seen a direct impact of people who've had coaches who change the way that they lead their teams from being, highly directive
Yeah.
and, telling people what to do, to moving to a style that is more teaching people how to fish and really driving autonomy and thinking. And I think, again, it really produces significant results because most people don't like to be told what to do. Most people don't like to be micromanaged, right? And so I think it really helps both the leader and the employee tremendously to have that experience.
Yeah, and I think I'm sort of struck by one of the things you said, which is like, you have this assumption, people want to be successful. People want to have autonomy. People want to have impact, and they want to be the initiator and driver of
They
that
do.
impact, right? And then the question becomes, well, how do you activate that in a way that encourages and motivates people to do that, but also balance that with accountability,
Right.
performance, goals and milestones of the company, which, if you think about it, really is the role of a manager, right?
It
Is
is.
to activate their team around that. But it is a skill, which I think is the other really important point you've raised, that it's not something that you just wake up knowing how to do.
Right.
I certainly didn't.
Right. And I think that, in many ways, as I said in the beginning, I was sort of like mad at leaders who are bad leaders. And now,
Well, Beth, were you mad because then it felt like the challenges got pushed on to the HR and
yeah,
people?
I think my patience has increased as I've gotten older and wiser. And, I would think about, like, isn't it logical? Like, if you treat people crappy, you're not going to get good results, right? Like, it just seemed basic to me. But then I started realizing a lot of that behavior comes from a place of fear and insecurity. And
Yeah.
if you're an insecure leader, and all of us are insecure, right? So, there's no question about that. But if you are coming from a place of insecurity as a leader, that is just going to drive some really dangerous behaviors. And especially in tech, I think they can really cause significant issues. So, I really believe in sort of the principles of Daniel Pink in his book Drive for knowledge workers, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And, when you are micromanaging, when you are not giving people agency over their work, when you are not connecting work to something greater, you are not going to get the results that you could be getting. And so, my belief now, as I've gotten, again, older and wiser, is the key role of a manager is to unlock the capabilities of their team.
Yeah.
And that is hard to do. That is not easy to do. And again, it is a skill and a craft, and it takes practice in order to be able to do that.
Well, if I could ask one more question on that, given that as a chief people officer, you're also controlling and deciding the budgets and the investments around this.
Yeah.
You've noted just how little investment has gone into learning and development. Could you share more about that? And then also share, how have you been able to sort of change that equation, or, in the companies that you've worked in?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think one that significantly impacts a lot of people in this role. So, it's interesting. I was just reading I shared this with you, an article by Josh Bernson, who's, one of the leading thought leaders on HR and people and talent, and he has done 4 studies on, the investment in learning and development in companies. And he has found that only 18% of companies do coaching and mentoring. Only 17% are growing their learning and development budgets. Only 17% have succession management and a leadership assessment process. And, all of these things are not about, soft skills or anything like that. This is about, risk mitigation
Yeah.
of a company. And, really being able to drive the results of the business. And so what I have tried to do as a leader over time is directly show the business impact to learning and development. Now, it's not always easy, but I do think there are things that you can link it to. You can link it to turnover, and you can link it to especially kind of turnover of critical talent. The other thing that we've looked at Chime is we've done engagement surveys, which I know many companies do, and we have been able to work with our engagement survey provider, which is Culture Amp, to on the back end put in everybody who's taken a training course, what course they've taken, do they have a coach, do they not have a coach. And then we've been able to prove that the employees and leaders who were taking part in our development programs had higher engagement score results. They had, it was 6 to 9% higher in terms of their ability to give appropriate feedback and guidance to employees. And so to me, if you can link it to the results of the business, you are going to get the best outcome in terms of your ability to get budget. It cannot be around, this is nice, people deserve it. That might be true, but in times of budget constraint, if it's not helping the business succeed, you're not going to get the traction. So, I would really encourage people to think about all the ways that they can link it to the success of the business. And then I would also say, kind of pick a couple things that are important to spend money on, but there's also some things that you can do that are little to no cost, and try to make sure that you are, driving both of those things inside your company.
Could you share one or two ideas of the things
Sure.
that are little to no cost? I know
Yeah.
certainly that's very top of mind for people.
Yeah, of course. And I completely understand that. So a couple things that we've done in many companies that I've been at, and again, like I've been at smaller companies where I didn't have the budget that I've had over the last several companies that I've been at. But one thing that I have found to be really effective is just a simple concept of sort of peer engagement. So doing things like a leader roundtable, where you would just pick a discussion topic or perhaps read an article and come together as a leadership group. You could have somebody facilitate it and just talk through those concepts. And I think, it gets people thinking. It gets people to have better connection with their peers. Oftentimes we think we're alone. We're not. So I think that is a very, very simple and inexpensive way to start driving development and curiosity around development inside organizations. The other thing too, and I think many companies do this, is, just sort of the simple concept of lunch and learns, or having people present internally. Having good presentation skills is really important. And I think giving people a safe environment where they can share ideas, that to me is a really great and easy way for people to learn as well.
And, I'm sure you get some incredible learnings and ideas that can have a real impact on the business, right? So you're
Yeah,
kind of picking one.
totally. There's no question about it. It does, these small things, especially cumulatively over time, do make a very big impact on the business.
Yeah, and we certainly have seen that at Sounding Board as well. We have a solution around group coaching, which is
Yes.
facilitated by a coach. And the biggest benefit around that is the fact that you're bringing a group together around specific topics or content, and that content helps drive a discussion that they may not naturally have as they're just working day to day, and also the relationships that they start to build. And I know certainly, as a lot of companies are thinking about how do you manage burnout, stress, anxiety, particularly with everything happening today in the world. One of the things that people often forget that community and support and being able to connect with others is such a powerful factor in influencing that positively.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I think the concept of group coaching, which it's been around for a while, but I think it's sort of, having its day in the sun. I think
Yeah.
it can really drive a lot of great results for individuals and for companies.
Well, if you would believe it, we are in our last few minutes. This conversation always goes faster than I would like because I always have more questions. But I think, Beth, you have had such an incredible career, and I think you've been able to do it in a way that really puts people on the equal playing field as business impact, which is really, I think, what ultimately all of us are striving for. And I wonder if you have any advice that you would give to others in the space around how to think about that and how to bring that into their organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, our jobs as people leaders is to drive business impact. And how I see that is, my business impact is to figure out, the strategies and the tactics that are going to really harness the collective of the people at the companies that I'm at to drive those business results. And so, I think you have to really think clearly about what are the, two or three things that you can do to equip people to drive business impact and to drive success. And, I have been in companies that have knowledge workers, which, in technology, it's what we have. And, sometimes what a knowledge worker needs is really, really different. And so, you've got to really think about those things. The other piece of advice I would give to people is, different things work at different companies. And one thing that I've learned is, you can have a playbook, but you cannot assume that what worked at one company is just going to be plug and play at another company. You really need to understand the business, understand the culture, and apply those broad concepts, but perhaps the implementation might be different over those companies.
Yeah, and the implementation piece, I think, is a one we could probably spend another episode talking
For
about
sure.
because that's actually also where we tend to see the rubber meets the road,
That's right.
right? Yeah.
That's
Um,
right. Got to be able to, I am sort of a, intellectual in many ways. I like to read. I like lots of concepts, but if you can't take those concepts and apply them in a business context, they're all for naught. So you've got to really make that connection inside your company.
Well, Beth, it was such a pleasure having this conversation with you today. I know certainly I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone out there also did as well. But thank you again for coming on, and hopefully we'll be seeing each other again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.